Here's something that's probably relatable to most of you. I have a very large backlog of games. My Steam library is embarrassingly huge, and yet I still spend money on more. In addition to that, there's a large number of hacks that I want to play, both because I enjoy playing Fire Emblem hacks, and because I want to pump out reviews and get more eyeballs on more projects that deserve more attention. As a result, these days, I tend to only do one playthrough of new ROM hacks that I discover. At risk of spoiling whether this will be a positive or negative review, Code of the Armor was the exception to that rule. Even before I killed the final boss and watched all of the character endings, I knew I was going to do a second playthrough of this game. Heck, I might even do a third or fourth. It's an incredibly satisfying experience to play, and in this review, I'm hoping to convince you of the same. So buckle in, buckaroos. I'm going to take you on a crash course through the gameplay, map design, and story of Call of the Armor. But before we dive into that, I do want to take a quick aside to explain what a telephone hack is and how it can affect the experience that you have, because Call of the Armor is the first telephone hack that I have covered on the channel, and they are slightly different to the more traditional hacks. Specifically, this is in regards to the way that they are designed. However, it can have an impact on the final product, and I want to prepare people for it if they are unfamiliar with the concept. Part 0. An introduction to telephone hacks. It is usually an oversimplification to say that a hack is made by just one person. Usually they will reach out to others for spriting, testing, and tweaking various balance points, which are very important parts of hack creation. Still, there is usually a single name attached to each ROM hack because they are behind the majority of the work that goes into it. This is not the case with telephone hacks. Instead, these hacks are created by a team without a specific person being designated as the leader. Instead, the ROM is passed around with each person altering and adding to it like a game of telephone. Typically, the addition is the next chapter. However, sometimes creators will add smaller things such as a new character. From a hacking perspective, the major benefit of this is that by splitting the work among a large number of people, you are able to pump out a completed game much faster than you would if it were simply a single person heading up the project. It is also worth noting that this approach to a project can be a reward in and of itself, as there is an amount of satisfaction to be gained in creating a coherent product that was influenced by so many large and divergent voices. From a player's perspective, it is worth noting that this design philosophy can have an impact on the final product in a couple of ways, most of which I consider to be positive. The first is that with most maps being made by different creators, a telephone hack can serve as a sampling platter, allowing you to get a taste of the design philosophy of a large number of creators. If you're only just getting into ROM hacks and don't know where to start, I would recommend playing a telephone hack and then looking up who created your favorite chapters and playing games that are made by those people. However, even for people established in the ROM hacking scene, the fact that the maps are all so varied keeps the gameplay fresh, and so you don't get bored doing similar tasks each map. While it is true that games made by a single creator can keep maps varied throughout their game, there is a limit to the amount that they will feel different from each other if they're made by the same person and following that person's general design philosophies. If they're made by a bunch of different people, you can get a taste of maps on all different ends of the spectrum. This, of course, does come with the downside that it is possible there will be some maps you dislike. For example, 16 different people made maps on Call of the Armor. Odds are there's going to be at least one that doesn't jive with your tastes. On the other hand, this does mean that when a map has a design philosophy you disagree with, it's only going to be around for one map. From a story perspective, it is also fun to see how things evolve when the team takes a yes and approach to the plot and lore of the world. I will get more into how this specific approach affects Call of the Armor story when I am reviewing its story, but overall I do think that it is entertaining to see how people with different approaches to storytelling approach building off of each other's work. And with that, you should have a general idea of what to expect from a telephone hack, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to these things specific to Call of the Armor. Part 1. General structure. From a broad mechanical perspective, Call of the Armor is largely unaltered from vanilla Sacred Stones. The class system is basically identical with a few changes. Armor Knights now have 5 movement, although Generals also still have 5 movement. Summoners summon green units instead of blue units to make them slightly less abusable, and playable soldiers can now promote either into generals or into halberdiers. In addition to soldiers, a few of the monster classes have now become playable, and the Lord class has been altered to be an armored unit with access to dark magic and stabs, and then the entire magic triangle upon promotion. Still, all other classes remain unchanged, and most notably the promotion gains have not been altered from vanilla Sacred Stones. Now, Sacred Stone's branching promotions are considered to be wildly unbalanced. For example, Ross and Garcia have the option to go warrior, but never really want to, because they both need the speed that is offered by either hero or berserker. However, it is worth noting that some of the design decisions behind Call of the Armor tip the scales back towards even. For example, Sniper versus Ranger becomes a little bit more competitive when you realize that you get the S rank bow in Chapter 3. Additionally, one of the early units is a fast pirate, who doesn't really benefit that much from the speed gains of Berserker, but appreciates bow access thanks to these scary flyers throughout the game. Still, some of the promotion games are incredibly unbalanced just based on the system that they're building off of. It's very unlikely that you send a Cavalier into Great Knight, and equally unlikely that you send a Knight into General. Thankfully, these underwhelming classes do have their chance to shine, as many of the game's pre-promotes are intentionally placed into the worst of the two class lines they have available. There's plenty of druids, generals, and sages to go around, as well as a unit who starts in a tier 3 pupil class. And a pre-promoted pupil is not the only example of a goofy unit you'll find throughout your journey. There is a lot of really fun and unique design in the cast. A few standout examples from early on in the hack are a very fast pirate, a thief with max constitution but a very low speed growth, a pre-promoted swordmaster with 2 strength but access to a personal weapon that ignores defense, an incredibly bulky cavalier who lacks in the speed and strength department, and a level 19 pre-promote with 5% in all of his growth rates whose staff rank you still want to grind because he has a higher magic than basically anyone else you will get throughout the campaign. Honestly, even the units who are closer to vanilla design, such as the early flyer or the trainee you get in Chapter 2, are incredibly fun just because of how they interact with the rest of the very unique cast. Daisy the Recruit manages to avoid the typical problem with trainees by ending up as not only the earliest possible Cavalier, but likely the strongest one as well, as both Itoro and Kim have significant problems. The trade-off, of course, is that you have to train her up, and she has a very rough start. The extremely different ways in which your characters play from each other can make repeat playthroughs feel unique, and this is doubly made so because of the way that interludes work. There are 3 separate character interludes, in which you are given a choice of 5 different units and told to select 2 of them. This is similar to a choice present in Tearing Saga, although unlike in that game, the choices tend to be somewhat more balanced. For example, after Chapter 4 you get your first choice, and have to decide between a Gorgon, who is a unique class, high movement, and can use magic, a Journeyman, which is probably the weakest one initially, but satisfies that trainee itch and does have a personal weapon as payoff for your training project, a Cavalier, Kim, who is incredibly bulky although lacks in the kill power that you would normally associate with the Cavalier class line, a Myrmidon with a personal sword that is basically a guaranteed crit with 10 durability, and a Soldier who isn't anything flashy but probably has the best generic combat of the 5 of them. While my personal preference is the Cavalier plus whoever I'm in the mood for, there are arguments for all 5 members, whether it's the best member for your army or just someone you find fun, such as the trainee. And for LTCers, don't worry, there's not going to be any sort of turn cost for picking units that are farther away from your Lord's starting position. In addition to fun unit design, there are a lot of new cool and wacky items. The Gaiden bow is a 0 might 1-3 range bow, and since it has 0 might, it functionally doesn't deal effective damage to flyers, which I am choosing to interpret as a clever reference to the fact that generic bows in Gaiden don't deal effective damage to flyers, whether they want me to or not. Sometimes these weapon and items can be used by anyone, such as the Wife Ring, which gives a slight luck boost to whoever's holding it, and other times they are personal weapons of specific units, such as the Armored Bow, which gives Liam a massive defense and resistance boost when he has it equipped, thanks to his desire to be a bow armor. Despite knowing that the core mechanics are identical to Sacred Stones, the addition of all of these wacky items makes me feel like I'm playing on a completely different engine. Sure, there's no personal skills, and there's no shoving, and all of the class promotions are identical to the way that they are in FE8, but it just feels different because you have so many different tools. Even the S-rank weapons have been reworked, and sometimes the reworks are incredibly impactful, such as the fact that the S-rank Light Tome gives plus 10 magic, suddenly making bishops even more definitively the best warping class in the game. And on the topic of warping, I should mention the final change that makes a significant impact on the way the game plays: the existence of the Chapter 10 Secret Shop. Now, secret shops are nothing new to Fire Emblem. It is a proud tradition to get broken items if you know where to bring the member card. Oftentimes this is something like a physics staff, sometimes it includes promotion items or stat boosters, but never have I seen one as busted as the secret shop in Call of the Armor, where you can buy warp and rescue staffs, and not in limited supply either. As much money as you would like, you can spend on movement staffs. Granted, they are very expensive, but you have a number of ways to make money prior to the Chapter 10 shop, and you can even sell the member card because it's honestly not worth going to any other secret shop. I'm honestly not even sure if any others exist because the Chapter 10 one is such a boon, and it really makes the hack play differently as you transition from the first half of the game to the second one. The first half of the game plays fairly similarly to vanilla GBA. There are really cool items and classes and units that alter the experience from vanilla, but at the end of the day, it is not fundamentally different. The second half of the game, you have access to a large number of movement staffs, and it feels more closely tied to 3 houses where you can just warp and rescue spam. That being said, even if you did spend a ton of money on Warp and Rescue, it's not like you're going to be using them for free, and that is where the clever character design creeps back into things. You see, the first and only staffer you have available is your Lord. In Chapter 4, you also get a priest who starts at E rank staffs. Both of these units are going to need to grind significantly in order to reach A for Warp. However, they can reasonably reach B for Rescue in a reasonable time frame if you so desire. As such, staff grinding them in the early game becomes a priority if you wish for them to become your primary Rescue and Warp users. However, you do have a couple of other options. In Chapter 5, you get a pair of monks, and monks can promote into bishop, which gains C staves upon promotion. This might be faster than grinding up E-rank staffs on a dedicated staff bot. However, you do then have to spend a master seal on them. There are also several mid-game units who are capable of using warp, although you do still need to grind the staff rank for all but one of them, and that one is an unpromoted unit who you must choose in the character interlude, so he comes with his own drawback in that respect. While it may seem at first that the existence of a large number of warps would hurt the second half of the game, I think it actively helps it, as it makes figuring out who is going to be your warper a very interesting puzzle, and one without a clear solution. It might be easier to grind staff rank on the pre-promoted Sage, but he has S Anima, so he can never reach S rank Light for that coveted plus 10 boost. On the other hand, if you promote a monk into bishop, you might be able to get the best of both worlds, but you need to grind their weapon rank and staff rank equally to do so. You also get a Valkyrie who starts with S rank light and B rank staves, so she can rescue from a very long range to begin with, but she is incredibly frail, meaning that if you are dragging people to the front lines, you need to find a way to get her off of them or end the map after she rescues. The maps are also designed in such a way that makes them difficult to trivialize with warp, and in my opinion, they are equally fun to play warp skipping or warpless. I did 2 playthroughs of the game, one where I was unaware of the secret shop and therefore didn't buy a large number of warps, and one where I was aware of it and therefore did buy a large number of warps. And they played very differently from each other, but neither one felt superior or inferior to the other. And I think that really speaks to a strength in the maps, in that they are fun to approach regardless of whether or not you want to warp skip them. And with that in mind, let's dive into the more specifics of the map design. Part 2. Maps. There isn't a single design philosophy behind the maps in Call of the Armor. That's kind of the point of a telephone hack. You get everyone's different design decisions and mesh them together, so you're going to end up with maps that feel somewhat different from each other. However, the one thing that all of the maps do have in common is they are all very, very good. You begin with a series of fairly vanilla route, kill boss, and seize maps. However, they are better designed than most vanilla maps in my opinion. Even from the onset, you have side objectives and a large number of units to get them, with a treasure chest in the first map and several villages in the second. The third map has a recruitable character as well as the self-imposed side objective of training up your trainee if you want to, and the fourth map actually forcibly splits your army in half and has the gap intraversable by flying units with the lore explanation that it is too hot to fly over the volcano because it'll cook the Pegasus alive, and honestly, I believe that. The fourth chapter is also where this game introduces one of its more unique concepts, enemy phantoms. Anyone who has played vanilla Sacred Stones will be familiar with the Phantom class. It has 1 HP, 0 defense, and 0 resistance, so it is meant to be incredibly frail, but the enemy Phantoms are incredibly threatening, starting out with Silver and Devil weapons, which your units cannot take a hit from. As a result, these flying enemies become something you either want to deal with on player phase, or clear the map fast enough to not deal with at all. They're not quite an anti-turtle incentive because they are fairly easy to kill, but they can make situations much more tense, and they almost always show up as reinforcements instead of just starting on the map. It is possible that they're intended to be an anti-turtle incentive, as they give 0 experience, so there's not really any benefit to killing them beyond not having them around, but I don't feel like they are anti-turtle. They often show up much earlier than would be reasonably expected to clear the map unless you're LTCing, and their frailty means that I don't necessarily feel like it's an urgent matter to end the map, simply an urgent matter to kill them. That said, there are some maps that feature anti-turtles, such as one that has islands sinking behind you because of a flood, one that has scary reinforcements show up after a certain number of turns, and my personal favorite, Chapter 10, which revolves around a gimmick where an incredibly powerful unit is trapped behind light ruins, and you need to complete the map before the light ruins wear off so that she doesn't chase you down and kill you. This is also one of the less vanilla chapters in the hack, as in addition to the scary trapped enemy, it features a 310 range lance, tents that you need to destroy in order to beat the map, and a secret event where you can have your Swordmaster tack to an enemy unit in order to promote into the Swordmaster class. No, I'm not joking. He is a Swordmaster who promotes into Swordmaster. This game has some wacky events, okay? On the whole, the eventing skills displayed are actually very impressive, and there are several chapters that heavily rely on events going off in order to satisfy their central gimmick. For example, Chapter 9 has you on a boat for the first 8 turns, sailing to the destination, and the map changes around you as the boat moves, with you needing to survive against flyers as well as pirates who snuck on board. Once the boat lands, you disembark and then charge onto the land to complete a land conquest, all contained within one chapter. Suddenly we've got a boat chapter and a beach chapter, the best of both worlds. For another example of a chapter that relies on complex eventing to create an experience different from vanilla play, look no further than Chapter 14. Here there are 3 castles, one in the north, one in the center, and one in the east. Each of these castles has a boss on the throne, and your goal is to defeat the boss on the throne of the center castle. However, you are told that if you conquer the top castle or east castle, you'll be able to get reinforcements. Meanwhile, if you go directly for the center castle, you'll probably have to deal with some sort of trap that the boss has planned for you. Additionally, if you would rather not deal with the boss of the central castle, you can conquer both the north and east castle and she will surrender since she sees that you're outmatched. Depending on which castle you go for first, a different wave of reinforcements will spawn, made up of monsters, flyers, or siege tome users. Conquering one of the secondary castles gives you some green unit helpers, and more importantly, causes the boss of the central castle to leave the gate in order to charge you head on. This is a catch-22, because now she's no longer passive as gate bosses are, but she also doesn't get gate bonuses, and so she might be easier to take down than she would be if she were on the gate. She even changes her weapon if she leaves her throne, so there's a lot going on this map, and depending on how you approach it, it can play out very differently. All in all, Call of the Armor's maps are very high quality, and they've definitely got a few more creators' names on my radar who I hadn't heard of before playing this hack. Now, as the maps exist in relative isolation from each other, it's fairly easy to credit and praise individual members of the team, but the same cannot be said for the story, which builds off of each other and therefore is fully a product of Team Distant Roads instead of one individual author. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the story. Part 3. The Story. Call of the Armor follows the story of Princess Kujia of East KOTOR, who fled due to a war between East and West KOTOR, and is now currently on a quest to discover the secret of her magical armor that is whispering to her, as well as potentially to help bring back ground from West KOTOR and win the war. The beginning of the game is fairly episodic. After warding off a raiding party, they fight bandits in a couple of locations, and then go to a mountain shrine to try to find the secret of the armor. When that doesn't come up with any answers, they leave again, explore a swamp, encounter a dark cult, and then seek a sage who might have some answers. However, throughout this entire process, we are establishing the lore of the world. We learn about the evil cult working in the background, we will learn about the Four Lights, who are essentially demigods, and the mystery of who crafted the armor and what the Dark Cult wants with it is ever present in our minds. As a result, while many of the individual chapters have self-contained stories, the overall narrative continues to move forward and build off of itself. And I think this is a great approach for a project that was written by multiple people. With each new chapter, the author is able to both write a self-contained story and add to the deeper lore of the world. Generally, I am a fan of the episodic structure, although I will be honest, there were a couple of points in the story where it felt kind of jarring to get yanked away from something we just spent a bunch of time establishing. The story itself is a tale of corruption, with the armor tempting our main character to do more and more brutal things, and I would say that it is darker than the average Fire Emblem game, but it's also a tale that doesn't take itself super seriously, at least not all the time. There are plenty of comedic moments. It would be a stretch to say that this is a comedy game, but there are certainly some comedy chapters. Perhaps this is a result of the fact that different chapters were written by different people, but the tone does feel pretty lighthearted at times. For example, when we are first introduced to the Four Lights, who are demigods that can possess human bodies, the one that they choose to introduce us to is the god of baking. And this results in a character getting a personal weapon called the croissant, and another character get a personal weapon called the bread knife. There are other funny moments as well, such as a thief who is addicted to body rings, and a character who has a boss conversation with the beta version of her portrait. I found all of this incredibly charming, and it helped to lighten the mood in between scenes where Kazuna was executing prisoners of war. That's not to say that the series scenes were bad. I actually thought they were very well executed, and it's nice to have a character who is more brutal than the typical anime protagonist, while also giving a reason for that besides just dark and edginess. The armor's corrupting force was the perfect vehicle to allow for more serious scenes. My only complaint is that I wasn't a fan of the way that the story ended, both in content and execution. There was a massive lore dump that explained a bunch of stuff we weren't aware of yet, including the addition of time travel, and it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. I still liked all of the characters and enjoyed the writing for the most part, but it definitely snapped me out of things a little bit. Although, I will fully admit that I was confused at some of the revelations, so I might just not understand all of the mechanics around the lore. That being said, I was a huge fan of the cast of characters. There is a very diverse cast on display here, with plenty of people of color as well as LGBTQ representation. This is the first game that I've covered that has a non-binary character, which is worth drawing attention to. A personal favorite of mine was this game's Est, Josie. She was a training project for me, and this is the first time that I've actually enjoyed using an Est unit. So you'll imagine that I squealed with delight when her ending card revealed that she decided to retire and spend time with her wife. Turns out the secret ingredient to making an Est good is lesbianism. Intelligent systems take notes. Now, the reason that I only found out Josie was a lesbian in her end card is that there are no written support conversations in this game. There are still supports, and they are built by deploying two units in the same map to each other, much like in Path of Radiance, but there will not be conversations. You simply activate the support and gain rank. While I would be lying if I said I wasn't somewhat disappointed by this, I completely understand the decision. That is a lot of dialogue to write, and honestly, it's kind of impressive when games do have fully written support logs. In addition to that, considering that the characters were written by so many different people, the supports would be exceptionally difficult to write, as you want to have characters support with each other across chapters, but then you struggle with, well, am I supposed to write the dialogue for the characters that I created, and the other person writes the dialogue for the characters they created, or do you have license to write dialogue for someone else's characters, and it's just a whole mess. When you've got so many people who've created different characters, it kind of just makes sense not to tackle that issue. The last thing you want is for someone to create a character that they are very attached to, and then another person represent them in a way that their original creator didn't intend in a support conversation. This does also mean that the characters don't have any paired ending cards, but honestly, you still get a pretty good idea of what defines the characters just by their introductions, their ending cards, and potentially any talk conversations that they have available to them. Additionally, there are a fair number of characters who simply retreat when they are killed so that they can maintain a presence in cutscenes. As a result, characters like Shale, Soma, and Express do get fleshed out by their screen time in the story. And honestly, at least for me, the most powerful character narratives are the ones that are defined by gameplay. Josie's Zero to Hero story as an Est, Shale the Jagan falling off and then making a comeback in the second to last map when he gets a personal weapon that's actually good enough to justify deploying him, Vivek getting HP and luck on his only level up despite the fact that they're both 5% growths. These are the things that define characters much more so than a conversation about whether or not they like flowers. And honestly, for me, that's its own kind of special. Conclusion and recommendation. If someone came up to me and said, I'm just starting to get into ROM hacks, what should I start with? I genuinely think Call of the Armor would be among the top 3 recommendations from me. The absence of skill system and unique classes make it very close to vanilla Fire Emblem, so it's comfortable if you're just dipping your toes in, but the great map design and the wonderful units showcase just what ROM hackers are capable of. The fact that people with such disparate map design philosophies made individual chapters for the same campaign allows it to function as a sort of sample platter, demonstrating all that the wonderful world of ROM hacks has to offer while not overly focusing on one specific aspect of it. As a result, I would definitely recommend this game to people new to the ROM hack scene, but I don't think it's exclusively for them, as I think that veterans to the ROM hack scene would also enjoy this campaign. The maps are very good quality, and many of them demonstrate that you can have an experience that feels far from vanilla while not fundamentally altering parts of the game engine. Additionally, due to the unique way in which this game was designed, I think that people with an interest in ROM hack history might want to check it out just to see the results of a telephone hack in action. And if you're interested in design but not necessarily in hack history, there are still some cool lessons to be learned here, such as the way in which unit design impacts the optimal choice for vanilla Sacred Stones promotions. Last but not least, if you're the sort of player who really enjoys optimizing your economy as well as planning complicated warp skips, then this game is absolutely for you. The Chapter 10 Secret Shop is a big test of money management, as you want to buy as many movement staffs as possible, and then the second half of the game becomes a test of how well you utilize those staffs, as many of the maps have complicated objectives that will require more than one warp. Of course, if you hate warp skipping, don't let this be a turnoff, as the maps are equally fun to play without it. And honestly, I prefer alternating between the warp skip and non-warp skip playstyle when approaching this hack. I honestly think there's something here for everyone. Even with the absence of support conversations, I find the story and characters compelling enough that I would still recommend this hack to someone who's purely interested in the story experience. I normally try to come up with something critical to say in these sections, as not every hack is for everyone, and I want to try to warn away those who wouldn't enjoy it. But the biggest thing I can come up with is that the difficulty is slightly above that of Fire Emblem 7 and 8. It's not to the extent that I would call this a difficulty hack, but it is harder than vanilla GBA for the most part. And without difficulty options or casual mode, some people might find it frustrating, although I myself did not find it especially difficult, so of course your mileage may vary. But other than that, I can't really think of anything critical to say of Call of the Armor, and if that's not a ringing endorsement, I don't know what is. This game is really good, and it's only 20 chapters long, so it's not even a huge time investment if you're worried about having a clogged backlog like I did. So yeah, go check it out. It's linked below, and it's really, really good. And you know who else is really, really good? My patrons, they're all awesome and I love them so much. A special thank you to every single one of you. Your support is what allows me to have one of the coolest jobs in the world, playing Fire Emblem. A special thank you to my pre-promote tier, which contains Anya, Danielle Kalaskis, George Grenville the 7th PN, Jamie Collins, Marin Karen, and Thick Molder. Hi, Editing Danny here, and about 20 minutes before I finished the editing process, I got a new pre-promote as well, so thank you to Emery Lafleur. You'll be in the regular shoutout next week, but I didn't want you to be excluded from this one. I really appreciate the support, and if you are interested in supporting the channel, there is a link to my Patreon below. But of course, please only donate if you are financially capable of doing so. I don't want anyone going broke over silly Fire Emblem videos, alright? Just watching and clicking like is good enough for me. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe, gamers.